Hey y'all, welcome back to the Book Stamp. My name is Kate and today I'm going to be going through all of the books that I read in the month of December. So December was a fabulous reading month for me. I read so many great books and I got to just read a lot during the month. I finished up my master's program, as I've mentioned I think in almost every video in the last little bit here. But that basically meant I have so much more free time to be reading. I'm not writing all the time anymore. So I was able to read 16 books this month, which I think is the most books I've read in a month all year. Just some quick stats from the books that I read. Over 50% of the books I read were from authors of color. And that was something that was really important to me because last month I noticed that I was reading way more white authors than anything else. So I wanted to make a point to read more authors of color this month, and I was able to do that. One of the other sort of interesting stats was that I read 4 poetry books this month, which is way more than usual for me. But I guess just sort of in the quiet, reflective moments of December, poetry was something I kind of sought out and wanted to listen to. I also kind of like just reading some shorter, quicker books this month. So my page count is a little bit lower, even though I read 16 books, because my page count ended up being 4,975 pages. But I still read so many great books in the month of December. It kind of like made my top 10 and some of my top lists of the year a little bit more difficult because I squeezed in some really good books at the end of December. So with that, let's go ahead and get on into them. The first book I read this month was Homebody by Rupi Kaur. This was her newest poetry book. She's most known for her very short Instagram style poetry. It was one of the first people to really popularize that type of poetry. She released a new book. I saw it on my Libby app that it was a new book my library had just gotten, so I was like one of the first people to request it, so I was able to get it really quickly. Like with my app, if you notice that they put a new book on really like early, then you can sort of catch it before most other people do, and so you don't get like bogged down in the lines. So I read Homebody pretty much in one sitting, just kind of like one evening in early December. It was nothing really to write home about. It was not my favorite of hers. None of the poems were really stand out to me. Some of them were kind of a little cringy almost, but I do like her work and I did enjoy reading it. It just wasn't really anything new or special to me. So I didn't feel like she had grown as much as I kind of was hoping for in that collection. The second book that I read in December was The Disaster Tourist. It's kind of been branded as sci-fi, but I really think it's really more like speculative fiction, if you could even go as far to call it that. But basically it's about this woman in Korea who works specifically designing trips around natural disasters and going to these natural disasters and like helping, and there were a lot of ties to sort of that type of volunteerism and sort of the like mission trips that are really popular in like evangelical states, and so I found a lot of really interesting similarities on that front, as well as I just this is a translated work of fiction, and I do find usually that translated works are usually like sort of the cream of the crop that gets translated into English, so they're usually very good, and I just found this so well written, so interesting. I thought thematically it was kind of right on that perfect line for me of like science speculative fiction that like almost veers too much. Like it was definitely like closer to this side of not talking too much about theme, but the theme was really, really heavy and important, and it had like kind of a bittersweet emotional ending, which I've really been loving in my books lately, and so I just really, really liked it a lot. I definitely would recommend it. It's on Hoopla. The next book I read was The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, and if you've already checked out my 2020 best books of the year, then you know that this book was featured in that. I absolutely loved Becky Chambers' book. I have sort of had it on the back burner of my brain as something I wanted to read all year, and I'm so glad I finally just decided to go ahead and read it because it was absolutely everything I want in a science fiction book and just a book in general with, as I said earlier, like the themes were not too like heady in it, but they were very, very prominent. We had like this diverse cast of alien characters, and there was so much queerness and just like found family and love and space adventures, but it wasn't too like techno-babbly. and I just absolutely loved it. It was kind of it's been described to me a lot of times as like a slice of life adventure. The audiobook was phenomenal. I cannot recommend it enough, and I am so ready to dive into the rest of Becky Chambers' work this year. This was a 5-star read for me. It was in my top 10 of the year, so like outstanding. The next book I read in the month of December was There There by Tommy Orange. I read this for the Disney Channel Games Readathon for the T prompt. I have a whole vlog about the book, which I will link up in the cards for you, and I don't want to spend too much time talking about it because I go into it in quite a lot of depth in the vlog, but I loved the audiobook of this. It follows a lot of different Native people in the city of Oakland and sort of how all of their lives entangle. There's some family members, some friends, and you sort of all culminate on the powwow that's happening in Oakland. That's like the final big moment, and it was just so superbly done. It was so well voice acted. I really loved the audiobook. This has been hailed as sort of a modern classic, one of those books that's going to stick around for a really long time, and it definitely deserves that. It was so good. The next book I read was Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. This was in my honorable mentions for top books of the year. Hands down my favorite YA fantasy of the year. Far and away, absolutely loved this book. I have a whole vlog where I give all my feels about it. It is kind of spoilery, so if you haven't, especially the latter half, so if you haven't read the book, bear that in mind. But basically, this book follows our main character, Bree, as she goes to sort of an early college program at the University of North Carolina. And through her adventures there, she kind of discovers her lineage and a whole secret society and her magical powers and what that means for her, as well as she's dealing with the grief of recently having lost her mother. And I just love this book so much. It is so well written. It is so poignant and beautiful. I love the character of Bree so much. I think this is going to be the next big YA book, and I think everybody should read it. The next book I read was The Selected Poems of Wendell Berry by Wendell Berry. I've been reading this as an ebook sort of off and on throughout the year. I really enjoyed a lot of Wendell Berry's poetry as I've read it in small segments in the past, and so I really enjoyed sort of delving into a larger amount of his work and sort of seeing a lot of the larger themes and things that he was talking about. There were a lot of poems I really loved in this collection. I really enjoyed it. It's not sort of one of the best poetry collections I've ever read. It was a little long for that for me, just because it is like poems from his like whole career of work. So I didn't feel like it really got the like really narrowed down on a theme, because it was more of a broad spans. So it wasn't like a perfect book of poetry for me, but it was really good, and I am really trying to sort of branch out the poems and poetry that I read, so this was definitely a step towards doing that. The next book I read was Catherine House by Elisabeth Thomas. This has sort of been going around BookTube as one of the weirdest books of 2020, and I can definitely attest that it is weird. Not the weirdest book I read this year, but weird definitely. This is a sort of dark academia mystery about our main character Inez, who goes to this 3-year boarding school college called Catherine House, and sort of unraveling the mystery of Catherine House and what like is going on there. And I don't know how I feel about this book. I found it compulsively readable. Like, I wanted to know what happened and I was very interested in it, but like through reading the character of Inez, it was kind of like, I've described it as like reliving the worst moments of my depression. So it's dark. It has some dark moments. It has some weird moments. It did not like have an emotional catharsis at the end. It had like the opposite of that. So it's definitely a weird book, and I have heard from a lot of people who read a lot of dark academia that they didn't super love it, that it kind of went too far into the tropiness of dark academia and not enough the like thematic things about dark academia. So I would definitely, if you're interested in reading it, don't go based on my opinion, go on somebody else's. But I did enjoy my read. I found it quite interesting, and I have a vlog that will sort of have some more of my thoughts of Catherine House later, coming out soon. The next book I read for the Disney Channel Games Readathon was The Devil in the Dark Water by Stuart Turton. This is another mystery book that I read this year. I'm not a huge mystery person, so that did impact. I only gave this 3 stars because I thought it was good and it was like okay, but I didn't love it. And I think that's because I just don't really enjoy reading mysteries. Like every time we went on a red herring, I was just like, come on, wrap it up, figure out what's going on. And I wasn't super satisfied by like the reveal at the end. It wasn't like truly satisfying in a way that it might be for a true mystery reader. I don't know. Also, there was some like unnecessary trigger warning. There are some like trigger warning sections of this, and I would look that up before you read it because they're completely unnecessary to the plot and should have been cut from the book. And so that really docked the star rating for me as well. I am kind of considering reading his other book, The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. I'm more interested in that just from a whole point of view of the book. But I tried the audiobook of it and hated it, like hated the narrator. So we'll see if I ever read his stuff again. I'm not sure. The next book I read also for the Disney Channel Games Readathon was The Tourist Attraction by Sarah Morgenthaler, which I have nothing to say about this book because the book had nothing to say. It was a cheesy, average romance. I listened to the audiobook on like 1.75 speed because it was just like, there was no substance. So you could just listen that fast because it didn't matter. I didn't feel like the book had anything interesting to say. I didn't really love any of the characters. Like, they were cute. It was fine. Like, the epitome of a C, you know? So, yeah, moving on to things that are more interesting. The next book I read was Anna on the Edge by AJ Sass. This book is so important. This is a library edition, and I'm so glad that I made my library buy it. This is about our main character, Anna, who is a figure skater and is sort of navigating, understanding their identity as they have aged, and they basically have a new coach come in who wants them to like skate as Sleeping Beauty and do this really beautiful traditional figure skating routine, and Anna's just like not here for it. And literally like the whole conflict of the novel is Anna not being comfortable doing something like that made them feel untrue to themselves. And the author is also a non-binary author. So I found this was just such a phenomenal middle grade story. It covered this topic of non-binary identity with just so much clarity and honesty that it's just a beautiful story, and I think more people should read it. The next book I read was Such a Fun Age by Kiley Reid. This book has been everywhere this year, and I read this on audio. The book follows our main character, Amira, who is a babysitter for a white family and has to take their daughter to a supermarket late at night after an incident happens at their house, and basically has the cops called on her because a white woman at the store thinks that Amira like stole Briar, which is ridiculous. And the book sort of from there goes into a lot of topics about white saviorism and like being a white ally and race relations, and it does it in like a compulsively readable thrillery fashion. Like I just like needed to know, have the tension in the story resolved, and wow, like literally the last paragraph of that book I still think about. Like the book is good. It is a good book. I did not like it, but it is a good book. That's my controversial take for the month of December, was that I did not like Such a Fun Age. I thought it was really well done. The character, like on a technical level, on a character, like I thought it was well done. I just did not enjoy reading it, which I think also as a white person was kind of the point. So I've heard it described a lot of times like it reads like a thriller, and I hate thrillers. They make me sick to my stomach. So this one did too. Congrats to Kiley Reid, but it is a good book and I would encourage people to read it. The next book I read was Followers by Megan Angelo. This is probably my most surprising book of the year. I think, especially from like its cover, I just think it's really branded wrong. It's branded almost as like chick lit, like a thriller chick lit, which is not what this book is at all. It's like speculative science fiction, kind of like the nosedive episode from Black Mirror, and it has like mixed with the Truman Show, and it is just so interesting on a theme level that I devoured it. And it has like 2 super unlikable female characters, which I love. Orla and Floss were a hot mess, and I loved every second of their lives. And followers, basically, you're following 2 timelines. The first timeline is a modern day story of Orla basically creating fake fame for Floss, and then the second story is set in like 2051 with our main character Marlo, who lives in a like full-time social media zone where they're filmed like all the time and people follow them, and sort of her understanding her life and basically leaving this like social media bubble. And I found it fascinating on the speculative fiction side. I found the characters extremely interesting. It was one of those books that I couldn't believe how much I loved it and like how mismarketed I felt it was. I saw it on a lot of my like feminist like blogs and radars, but I never really saw it in the science fiction realm, which is where I think it really belongs. And I think the cover, I actually love the cover, but I do think it kind of misrepresents the book to a large audience that I think would really like it. The next book I read was Frankissstein by Jeanette Winterson. This was one of the Reading Women 2019 shortlist for best fiction books, I believe. It is sort of a modern retelling of Frankenstein. We have blurbs that are set in the modern day with sort of our inspired Frankensteinian characters, and then also there is like a section following Mary Shelley during the time that she's writing Frankenstein, and it is just a beautiful, like Jeanette Winterson is just a phenomenal writer, and I just loved listening to the audiobook and just like hearing some of the lines from the book, and I was just like, wow, that's so beautiful. And I just found it really, really interesting, and it develops, it is also more on the science fiction end, where sort of branded as this queer love story, which it definitely is, but it also talks a lot about transhumanism and robots and cyborgs, and it just had so many different influences that I feel like I listened to it on audiobook, and I want to get a physical copy to like really start to pick it apart and pick out all of the influences, because I feel like there was just so much that is like left in the book to be discovered, and I love books like that. The next book I read was The Other Einstein by Marie Benedict, who I think some of her more popular books include like The Only Woman in the Room and Lady Clementine just came out, I believe, where she basically takes women who were connected to these very important and powerful men, in the case of The Other Einstein and Lady Clementine, and sort of tells their life story. And this tells the story of Einstein's first wife, who was also a physicist, and the beginning of their lives together, and sort of their story of falling in love and eventually falling out of love with each other, and her contributions to his scientific work. And I don't know, because I really do love this book because it does reveal a lot about Mitza's contributions to his work and how he prevented her from being published in a lot of works. I do feel like it played with the facts a little bit too much for my liking, because I feel like there was a different way that she could have written this that still made Albert Einstein look like an asshole, because he was, but was a little bit more truthful. Like in his later letters about her to like other people, he like calls her like a stupid bitch and like says all this like horrible stuff about her. And in the book, it's not, I feel like that was the part she took too much liberty with, and it just lost a lot of resonance for me. And just from a technical writing perspective, I did not find her like internal monologue interesting very much. I just didn't like it on a book level, which was really disappointing. So I don't know if I'll be reading any of the rest of her works. The next book I read was Ring Shout by P. Djeli Clark, which this is a horror book, a horror novella that is set in the post-World War I American South. And basically the Ku Klux Klan has made a deal with the devil that is basically making them into genuine monsters. And so our main character is fighting those monsters and has been sort of chosen as this heroine to defeat the monsters and the Ku Kluxes, as they're called. And it's just like this really interesting narrative exploring a lot of different themes, but also like in a very action-packed, really gross and kind of scary way. It's already been picked up for a television adaptation, which I think is brilliant, because while reading it, you just kind of think the whole time like, wow, I would love to see this like with a Game of Thrones budget. So I'm really excited to see that, and I'm also really looking forward to reading more P. Djeli Clark's work, because I've heard it's excellent, and I really enjoyed Ring Shout, and can't wait to read more. And the last 2 books that I read this month were both poetry collections by Joy Harjo, who is the current Poet Laureate of the United States. I believe she's still faculty at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, which is where I went to school. I actually got to like hear her give a presentation, book talk, when she first got hired at UT Knoxville, and it's one of like my most salient memories of undergrad, because I like went by myself and she was like reading one of her poems, and I literally texted a line of it to my sister, and about the time I hit send, my sister had texted me like the next line of the poem. It was like, oh my gosh, I'm here at this poetry thing and this made me think of you. And like we were both there independently, and I like looked back and there she was like several rows back. So I really have loved Joy Harjo for a long time, and so I wanted to read some more of her poetry. I read An American Sunrise with my eyeballs. I read it as an ebook, and then I listened to Conflict Resolution for Holy Beings by her, because a lot of her beliefs about Native storytelling and music really weave into her views about poetry, and so I wanted to also listen to her sort of speak the poems, as well as in the recording she sings and she speaks in Muskogee. And so I felt like that was another layer that I really wanted to experience with her poetry, and I loved both of them. They were both excellent 5-star reads for poems. I thought they were super well done. I think I liked An American Sunrise a little bit more. Both of these poetry collections are included with the Audible like Plus membership, so I definitely recommend going and grabbing those and reading them. Alright y'all, well those were all of the books that I read in December. It was a great reading month. I hope it's going to lead into a great reading year in 2021. I'm super excited. I have a lot of really fun stuff planned for 2021. To give you a little bit of a sneak peek for my January TBR, I am planning on reading all of the top 10 science fiction books from the Goodreads 2020 awards. So right now I'm kind of reading the back catalog. A couple of them were second books in series, so I'm reading the first of those, which were already on my TBR to begin with. So it's not like I'm adding 100 books to my TBR. So I am doing that right now, as well as I'm trying to read through a bunch of books that I started in the month of December, including These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong, Conjure Woman, and The Magnetic Girl. So I'm trying to get all of those done as well, so I sort of have a clean slate moving into the rest of 2021. So a lot of really fun things planned, and a lot of really great books to read. So hope you hang out and stick around for those. Thanks y'all.